Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Coach podcast. Today, we have another amazing guest on the show, and this show is all about uncovering tips and tools from young professionals in their late 20s and their early 30s that can help college students get insights, get experience, get knowledge that can give them guidance along their career journey. I really struggled to get this kind of information when I was in college. I went to Yale, I worked on Wall Street. And now my passion is to help students be successful. And so this show is all about extracting value, extracting insights, and sharing them with you. So grab a pen and paper and take notes, and feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. Enjoy the show. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Career Coach. This is where we speak to amazing young professionals, uncover their journeys and the advice that they have along the way. And I'm very excited to speak to Sabra, who I met, I don't even know, was it 10 years ago, 9 years ago? I'm not quite sure, but it was a while ago. Sabra came to Cape Town in her summer to do one of the experience programs, and one of the first ones. And it's just incredible to reconnect and to get the opportunity to learn about her journey into the career that she is today. So welcome, Sabra, to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. I'm so excited to be here. I think it feels like it's been so long since we've last talked, and a lot has changed in my life. And I sort of credit a lot of the decisions that I've made to kind of starting from some of those key decisions in college, whether it was going to IX or like choosing to take on certain internships after that. So I'm excited to be back because it feels like it rounds out the story.
Yeah. I actually remember when you came to Cape Town, you made this video, a day in the life of an IX student, where you had a GoPro and you were like, you filmed your whole experience throughout the day, where you climbed the mountain and you're in class and you watched the sunset, you ate ice cream. And I actually used that video so many times when I was showing people about the program. It was really awesome. I'll actually share that with anyone who's listening who wants to see it, just because it really is a blast from the past. I mean, I don't think anyone even uses GoPros anymore.
I know. It was such shaky footage, but I felt compelled to capture the experience. So my mediocre videography skills were put to the test, but I'm glad I documented it.
Yeah, so I think a good place to start is to just give the audience a little bit of background about yourself. What did you study, and what was like sort of your high level summary of your career path to today? And then, as that conversation progresses, I'll ask questions about your specific roles and, what it's like to work at these companies. So maybe you can just give everyone a bit of your background story and your journey.
Absolutely. So so I grew up on the East Coast in the US, outside of New York, but I ended up going to college on the West Coast. And I went to Stanford, and there I studied economics. And probably like many people that find themselves in the economics major, it's like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to do business stuff, and I don't know what that means. So I'll major in economics. And I think, like many college students, I had a very open mind about the possibilities. I was like, yeah, I'm fine with any career route as long as it's consulting, investment banking, or big tech. Um, and that was really my mindset. It was very myopic around sort of these specific areas, and that was largely because I actually just didn't know how to know more about each of them, or to know how to know more about things outside of that. And in college, I did sort of investment banking internships. And between some of those investment banking internships was actually my summer in Cape Town. And I think that was such an important time for me to, during that summer, get exposed to tech. So it was actually like, learning to program for the first time. That made me realize that, hey, maybe I don't want to go into finance. Maybe I actually want to go into something slightly different. And tech has a whole breadth of things tied into it, kind of bundled in one term. And so after school, I ended up deciding to go into what was sort of a bridge between, I would say, a tech and a finance company, which is Visa, the sort of card network. And then after Visa, I ended up going to Stripe, a payments company as well. And I've been at Stripe for the past 5 years now. And so that is the high level overview of how I got here.
You're working as a product manager or chief of staff at Stripe. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So I am the chief of staff for payments engineering, which is a very, very large org in Stripe because it is payments processing. And it's about, a surface area of 800 or so engineers. And I think the chief of staff role, particularly at some of these large companies, um, can sort of vary in the exact scope. In my case, it feels like an incredibly high agency role. Um, it's about sort of in some cases really managing the budget and the opex of the org as a whole, as well as the headcount. Uh, the role also kind of sometimes entails really serving as a proxy for the person who's like the head of engineering for this area. And so just like being an extension of that individual because it is such a massive surface area, it's really a hard job for one human to do. And in other cases, it's, being deployed onto very tactical efforts that are important to the business that we want like someone who's very, very high touch on. So definitely a jack of all trades type of role.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. Congratulations on getting into that role at such a relatively young age. I mean, it seems like a lot of responsibility and a very dynamic position within the company.
It definitely, I think dynamic is the right word for it. And, perhaps like many people end up finding, you sort of stumble into you sometimes stumble into roles that feel like a good fit for you. And that was certainly the case here. I did not come out seeking this type of role. I did not know that this was a type of role that existed. I only know chief of staff in the context of the White House. Um, but it worked out nicely, I think, for my skill sets at least.
Yeah, I mean, I've always followed like a lot of tech companies and how they're doing and how they're growing, and I must say, Stripe is like one of the most incredible success stories in terms of tech that I've seen. I am actually very curious to know what it's like to work there, to be part of this organization. It seems incredibly innovative. Um, I would love to understand, like, what is the culture like? What is the company like? Do you like working there?
Definitely. Yeah. So again, that's one of those things where like when you're in school, you just like hear this term culture thrown around and you're like, I hear it's important or something, but you don't really know how to interpret it. I think, I'll beat the drum on what everybody says. Culture is so important. And even though it's a buzzword, it is absolutely the cheeky buzzword that you should anchor on. It changes the trajectory of your day-to-day experience, how you feel about the culture of your company. And the culture at Stripe, I would say, is characterized by a few things. I think one, it's characterized by a set of individuals that I think are just fundamentally kind, which is not normally the first word one uses to describe the people that they work with, and yet how could it not be the most important word that you want to use to describe the people that you work with? So definitely, Stripe hires for very fundamentally good, kind people that operate with tremendous integrity. I think that's really woven into the culture of the company and very much, stems from the leadership that we have. I think another thing is that we definitely, have a certain, intellectual curiosity and quirkiness that comes with that. So it's really a set of individuals that in some cases like pride themselves on being, you know, geeky payments nerds. Like that's what we are. Who hurls themselves into the payment space? It's not like one of those really, you know, sensual industries that one is drawn to. But it's really the geeky payments folks, and so I think we lean into that and we embrace our nerdy side. So those are two really big things, and then I think the third is just um, a culture of like tremendous empowerment and agency. Um, you know, the, I've worked at places, whether it was full time or in internships, where my day to day work was, this is what my boss assigned me to do. So this is what I will go do. That is so not how things operate at Stripe. It is very much like, hey, you are owning this domain or effort, go forth and drive it. There is very little, fear of stepping on people's toes. It's very much like all hands on deck. We have plenty to do, so take this effort and run with it, and you keep me updated on how it's going and where you need my help. But it's definitely not this, this culture of micromanagement, which I love. That was very, very important to me to have. So.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an incredible place to work. And where are you actually based? Are you on the West Coast or on the East Coast or in San Fran?
I'm on the West Coast, yeah, just outside of San Francisco, in Burlingame, California.
Okay, and do you like living there?
I do. It's we don't have all the amazing weather of SoCal, but it's still better than what I was used to on the East Coast.
Yeah, yeah. It's snowing on the East Coast right now, so we definitely got some benefit on on the West Coast. Okay, so I'd love to, for a college student, I think, they're always trying to understand, like, what does it mean to work? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis, in terms of like meetings, in terms of routine? It would be really interesting for you to just like unpack a day in your life, like what does it look like? I'm actually very curious as well, to be honest.
Yeah. So I think that in general, I'd say that work is characterized by two buckets of things that you're doing at the same time on a daily basis. Like one is you are doing tactical execution of things that are relevant on a 2-week time horizon. And then the other bucket of things is like you are doing prep for things that are relevant on a 1-year time horizon. And that ends up playing into your day-to-day routine. So for example, on an average day, I might have a sort of set of meetings with various folks that are working on important engineering project work streams. And so that is very execution focused. It is understanding, it's not as sort of dry as just like status updates, but it's definitely understanding like what are the big design decisions that we're making that we need to make a trade-off decision on, what are some of the blockers that we're trying to overcome, and understanding those so that we can bring in the right reinforcements. Like, do we have a partner, an external financial partner that we are having trouble negotiating with, and sort of putting our heads together on how to unblock those types of things. So that's very much like the here and now. And then there are like other things in that category of very much like metric reviews of where we are at. So I might on any given day have a sort of cadence of reviews that looks at like, well, where are we trending in terms of margin for this particular product, and like what do our financials actually look like? Although those don't move tremendously day over day, it's the kind of thing that you need to keep pulse on to understand like the blips and what causes it. Um, and then kind of in that second bucket of things, I would say like, on any given day, I might have, certain meetings that are really looking forward on that 1-year time horizon where we're sitting down together and saying, you know, like, let's have a product review for this, this this feature or product shape that we want to build out and discuss what that rollout would look like over the next 1 to 2 years, or let's discuss this architecture that will have impact over the next 1 to 2 years, and let's determine how we're going to point our ship in that direction. Um, and so, all that to say, I think it is a lot of meetings, in person or in Zoom, and then it's a lot of messaging over Slack to coordinate across all these different individuals, and to oftentimes like really trying to unblock open questions and hurdles and sort of reduce ambiguity. I think every day is an exercise in saying, how do we radically reduce ambiguity around what we are trying to achieve, whether that's like internal alignment or alignment with external partners that we work with. And in some cases that might mean, that you may be sitting there asking yourself like, Sabra, when do you do like the actual work? Like, when do you sit down and do work if you're in meetings all the time? And there is that portion of time also where it's like, all right, let me take a step back. Let me actually just like write out, my understanding on the state of things. So that's like a big cultural thing, I would say. Also within Stripe, you hear about it in many companies like Amazon, where it's like a huge written culture of documents to kind of align folks on a shared sense of truth. So um, I do also write a fair amount of documents.
So you write a document just like on the state of things as they are, and then like maybe reassessing the strategy and how you want to go forward, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big like I think that is a big part of what I do in this sort of chief of staff shape of role, where it's very much like, let's get to a shared understanding of truth. And whether that's like, hey, here are here are my assumptions, XYZ. Like, here are the principles. Like, do we agree on these principles that we want to drive towards? If yes, based off of that, here's the proposal on what it seems like we should be doing differently. And so
Mm.
I do a lot of exercises like that. If you're a different shape of role, like an engineering manager or a product manager, you probably do things similar, but it might be a little more focused on a specific, you know, product, like actually writing a product brief for a new feature kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like sort of a very visionary type of role where you have to think long term because the decisions that you make, sort of like you say, steer the ship in a direction. And sometimes you want to make sure that it really is going in the right direction.
I think that, yes, there's definitely that component. I'm certainly not doing this alone. There are many, many smart individuals that are pointing this ship that I partner closely with, and but I think certainly in this capacity of this role, I'm taking a heavy execution focused lens of like, how do I make sure that we operate better and efficiently towards this vision. And sometimes the act of trying to make that concrete in and of itself helps articulate the vision. And so I can't wholly take credit for setting the direction, but certainly work very closely with many folks on trying to do that.
I imagine that, working at Visa and working at Stripe, even though they are two similar in sort of like similar fields, were two completely different experiences for you. What would you say were like are the major differences in terms of these two work experiences that you've had?
Yeah, so I mean, the first one that comes to mind is the fact that these companies were at like, very very different scales when I joined them. So when I joined Visa was already like an over 12, 13,000, maybe 15,000 person company. When I joined Stripe, it was more in that range of like an 1,000 person company, which is actually still quite scaled. But it very much felt like I kind of know everyone, not literally, but like you definitely feel like, yeah, I pretty much know all the people. I have there's no difficulty. There's no sort of like organizational headwind for me to be able to find the person that I need to talk to. I can always find it. Whereas, within Visa or any company where you're operating at that scale, it absolutely just becomes more difficult because there's so many more people. The organizational structure becomes more complex. It may be matrix structured. So I think that was one very noticeable difference. And I think tied to those different like scales of operation was that um, you know Visa absolutely had to move at a different pace than Stripe, and Stripe was moving so fast, and Stripe continues to move so fast. And I've actually loved that part of it. Um, and I think as any company that scales, you start to need to change your operating model a bit in order to make sure that everything is operating in lockstep and compliantly. And there's some slowing down that comes with that is healthy because you cannot be totally scrappy. But when I first started, it was definitely more of this like moving very quickly, a little bit of scrappiness. And Visa was very structured, like high degree of processes in place because it was operating at the scale of being a massive global network.
Yeah. And what do you think is the most surprising thing that you've realized just like being in the working world compared to what you thought it might be when you were in college?
Ooh, so many things. I think I think one is that you will be surprised you will be surprised by how much fun you can have working on challenging problems when you are working on those problems with people that you deeply respect and that you have tremendous psychological safety with. Those are the two things. If you are missing those things, like it can then working on hard things is miserable. It's just hard and suffering. But when you're working on hard problems where you feel as though you have deep partnership with people that you admire, like if you are not surrounded by people that you admire, you need to leave that company. So if you're surrounded by people that you admire and that people that you feel, deeply support your success and people that you feel you can learn from, then you know that you are kind of in the right place. And I think I undervalued that when I was in college. It was such a theoretical concept to me. I was like, of course I want to work around people that I think are good. But you don't know what good looks like until you are like really deeply in a place and you see people that you will learn from and people that you will not. And um and so the good thing is I think you'll find that you will know when you are in the right place because um you will take on those hard challenges with much more alacrity than you would have expected, and you will enjoy the process. Um so seeking out those is key.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'd love to shift a little bit to, your college life and decisions that you made there that kind of led to where you are. If you could go back now and just have a chat, maybe a coffee or a lunch with yourself when you're 18 or 19, what would you talk about? What would you say, given what, you were feeling at that time about your career?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I would go back and say to myself is to fundamentally open up my mind and to make sure that I am making decisions um, from a place of curiosity rather than fear. And that's not a concept that I've personally coined. It's actually one that is like really that's really championed by somebody I respect, an author named Elizabeth Gilbert. But uh, but I think that's like such a huge thing. When you are young, it is really hard to see beyond the the bias of how you have always lived. And it's very hard, even for people in your life that are trying to give you reasonable advice, like your parents, to see beyond the bias of the life that they have already lived. And I think in college it's such a unique experience where you can break any molds of how you've lived. You are so early on that you can change your trajectory in any way. And I think what I realize now when I look back on my college self is I'm shocked at how much I realized I was pursuing things from a place of self-doubt. I was pursuing this path you know, that I felt would be, extremely stable. And I felt it was the path that I could succeed in. But it wasn't necessarily the path I secretly wanted. It was like there were many creative pursuits, I think, that I wish I had invested more in school. And maybe even producing that video in South Africa was a testament to me trying to like dip my toes into this creative curiosity that I had. And so this doesn't say that I'm not happy with like the direction that my career has taken in a more traditional sense, but I wish I had fostered many more of those creative interests in college, but I didn't because I felt like it didn't serve this vision of the life that I had. And I also feared that I couldn't be successful as a creator. So now I do those things. I have since learned to do those things in parallel and I love it. Like I love doing it in parallel with my job today. And it's become such an important part of my identity. But there was a lot more opportunity to have runway to develop those earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually would love to dive into this topic a little bit more with you right now about fear. and making decisions based out of fear. Because even when I think about back of my life in college and how I made decisions, I often felt anxious that I wasn't doing the right thing for some reason. And there were people around me, going into banking and finance, etc. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I have to, because if I don't, I'm a failure, And I think I experienced something very similar to you where my mind wasn't actually open enough to fully understand all the possible opportunities out there for me. So, I might have applied for a job and didn't get it. And I'm like, I failed, and I'm like, that is actually crazy because, like, there are millions of opportunities available. I just couldn't see them because, there was this element of fear stopping me from being curious enough to just have more conversations or to apply for more things or to have that experience that could, make me meet someone or a conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm really trying to understand, like, for somebody listening who might be saying, oh, well, that's all good in theory, but I need to get this job and I'm nervous to get it. Like, how can you practically infuse that like logic into your life where it almost doesn't really make sense at that age?
Yeah, I think about this topic a lot because I think it's the struggle of like all college students, all 20 something year olds. And I've like started calling it's this issue of like, how do you feed your soul while putting food on the table? Like, how do you uncover the things that you really want to pursue and have the boldness to pursue them while also recognizing the like very real practicalities of like, yeah, financial stability should not be undervalued. And many careers offer that. So I think concrete ways that one can do that in college would be like one that comes top of mind is just like start to take on experimentation as a life philosophy in any way to like if you have even the slightest curiosity towards something, you need to poke into that. Like go to meetups with people in that field, reach out to people just to learn more, like and just experiment, like read a bunch in that area, experiment with getting deeper into it. So take on this philosophy of like rapid experimentation, especially when you have the bandwidth in college. I think
Yeah.
the second thing is to, which I guess is like related, but it's just like that idea of following your curiosity and like the intuition behind your curiosity wherever it takes you, and don't discriminate, or don't stifle it because it doesn't feel like it fits into some set of guardrails on the career that you quote unquote should have. I think I think another one would just be around um, would just be around taking time to actually make sure that you are unpacking the distinction between what you want and what you think you should want, because those lines can get very blurred when you're contending with social expectations, when you're contending with like prestige is very lucrative and it can change your view of what you want for your life. um, so trying to parse some of the blurred lines there, I think is important.
Yeah. What was the name of the book you actually read? By who was it? Elizabeth Gilbert. Is there a specific book that maybe students can read that can help them understand a little bit more about this?
I think
Was that the name of the book?
one of her books that is actually about writing, but I think is a good sort of has a lot of fundamental tools for better living is called Big Magic, and it's really about just like embrace um, how you embrace your truest intellectual curiosity and sort of live beyond fears and self doubt, um, and I think that's maybe that's another very concrete thing that I would suggest people reflect on when they're in college. It's I was never somebody in college who would have self-described as being insecure or as having self-doubt. I was very comfortable. I could stand up in front of a stage of 300 people and feel very comfortable. But self-doubt is extremely contextual. It may be that you have self-doubt in this specific realm that you don't think you can succeed in. You want to be a YouTube star, but you secretly don't think you can be, or whatever it might be. You want to start this you want to start this startup, uh, and you might be bold in every other academic aspect of your life, but you have like pretty significant self-doubt about whether or not you could really be successful there. I think it's so important to name and label that self-doubt that you have. And then as soon as you do it, you just let it be. Like just let it exist. Let it exist with you and go and do it anyway. And you don't wait to feel ready, because readiness is a myth. And the whole point is you overcome your fear and you overcome your difficulties with readiness, not by, not by speaking affirmations to yourself, but by just iterating through the micro steps in the process and proving to yourself that actually like you can do it. You can get going in the right direction.
Yeah, so taking that step, like almost like the more uncomfortable it is, the more beneficial it is for you, because you're like embracing the discomfort and letting it teach you where you need to go.
Absolutely. I think that's well put. I think, there's this tremendous fear of uncertainty that folks have when they're in college, especially when you put in all this work to get to this place and to set you on this, on this trajectory that is perhaps, I don't know, has its own accolades tied to it. But really being uncomfortable with the discomfort, really leaning into uncertainty, you need to get yourself to believe in your bones that leaning into the uncertainty is what will bring you the most learning. That's the whole point. It's like you need to be at the bounds of your comfort zone in order to learn the breadth of possibilities for you. Otherwise, you are selling yourself short of delivering to the world perhaps your greatest gifts. And
Ah, I
you will
love it.
regret that later.
You give me goosebumps. Yeah, that's actually incredible advice. And it should inspire people listening, because, at that age, when you're 18, 19, 20, it's up to you to craft the life that you want. The decisions are in your control. Instead of maybe going out one night, maybe take the time to be curious and look at different possibilities, carve out time in your calendar for experimentation. Maybe it's 4 hours on a Sunday just to be curious and play with what's possible. That could be an interesting thing to do to change, the potential outcome of your whole life.
Absolutely. And I think the more that you do that, you start to find, again, like one of these concepts that's spoken about, but it's like you do find that the universe is colluding for your success. Like it really is. The universe is trying to drop, serendipity into your life, but it needs you to be hungry enough to like put out enough tentacles of, feelers, to sort of enable that serendipity. And you find it just by leaning into that intellectual curiosity in whatever realm speaks to you most.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am interested to hear about, your experience in Cape Town. What made you take that risk, and like, how was that experience for you? Because, coming to Cape Town, South Africa, doing a program that hasn't been around for a while, meeting new people, what was that like in your life in terms of a new experience?
Yeah, I think that, and I don't say this for flattery, but like, I think that Cape Town experience was really the start of me leaning into a lot of these, I guess, philosophies that now I so deeply, or that I hold so dear. And so, to just set context on where I was before I did that, so um, I did that Cape Town, experience with IX after my sophomore year. And the summer before, after my freshman year, I had done a extremely rigorous internship in investment banking in New York City. And coming out of that, I, had a return offer, but I just could not bring myself to go back and do it. I could not. And I felt extremely conflicted because it was so prestigious at that time to have gotten an investment banking internship after freshman year. And all forces around me were saying like, keep going with that. You're going to rocket ship after college. But I mean, just listening to that deep intuition within me that said, I do not want this. Like, I will feel as though I have, um, I might be succeeding on paper, but I will be deeply settling on what feels right to me if I take this. So instead, I stumbled across IX. And to your point, it was extremely new. I was like, is this thing legit? and but it felt right. It felt right to one, airdrop myself into a completely different location, because you just get, again, to that point of experimentation, you get a whole new perspective just in being in like a new geography, um, and two, from the aspect of kind of allowing me to explore these curiosities that I had. Like, coding was this thing that was sort of intimidating from afar, and I didn't want to have that intimidation, and I didn't want to live like in my self doubt of whether or not I could do CS. And so it was kind of this great fit from that perspective. And I think that was this act of really listening to, what do I secretly want, and what is ensuring that I'm living from a place of, you know, of listening to my curiosity. And I think that ultimately got me to Cape Town.
And when you got here, like, the culture, the nature, what was that like for you, having never been to like Africa before?
it was it was Well, I mean, I vividly remember being greeted as I got off the plane with a sign that was welcoming me. I don't think I've ever gotten a greeting before that or since that to that scale. So, um, but I think it was wonderful to be sort of saturated in this group of folks that I felt such deep alignment with, as in, we all came here because we were all in college and feeling a somewhat similar thing of like, hey, I'm a hungry, ambitious person, but also I like want to leave room for experimentation. I have these, I'm curious about these realms, but I also want to get exposed to living in different places. I'm not wedded to staying in the US my whole life kind of thing. And so I think my favorite part of that was so quickly touching down and realizing these are the right types of people I should be around, not just right now in IX, but going forward for the rest of my life. These are the shapes of people that I should surround myself with. And I felt as though I, you know, learned a ton from the different types of folks. I think I even remember I wrote a blog post about about many of the folks in my IX class that had their own wonderful, quirky traits that I admired. Um, so it was a really, very quickly I realized that this was a was an important decision
Yeah.
that I had just made.
Yeah, I think traveling, doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter what you do, that just the act of traveling is going to teach you something, new culture, a new way of thinking, different economic system, different political system. It's all different, and to understand it and see it and know that the world is just a very multifaceted place. And there's so many things to experience is one of my core beliefs. It's like I like to travel and see the different aspects that the world has to offer, and know that each one of these ways of living is different and is beautiful in its own way.
Absolutely. I think you sort of distilled it well there. Like, one of the things you don't realize when you're growing up in the sort of paradigm of your own childhood is that there are so many different ways to live life. And not just to live life, but to live life incredibly happily, like with so much joy. And it's so easy to think, again, when you're saturated in just like one framework, that this is the only way. And and that can happen in many different pockets, even sometimes in Silicon Valley. I sort of ask myself, like, wow, I'm so saturated in a culture that is unrepresentative of how so much of the world lives. Now, there are many aspects of that that I love. There are many aspects as well that I know are like actually suboptimal. Um, and and it's just important to be able to have awareness on that through traveling, that there are so many different ways to live joyfully, so that you can have a healthy perspective and make an informed decision for yourself, because so many decisions we fall into are because of like asymmetric information. Like, we we just didn't know that there were other options for how to choose to live life or where to choose to live life.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely as a college student, make the time to travel and go to obscure and different, unique places. That's definitely my advice. I'd love to get or pick your brains a little bit on like, recruiting tips. A lot of college students are building their resumes, are getting interviews, are trying to prepare. They're, anxious about it. I'm not sure how involved you are, like in hiring. Sounds like probably quite involved in that. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts and advice on how to position yourself well to be noticed, firstly, through your resume. And then secondly, like when you get an interview, like how do you actually stand out from the crowd?
Yeah. So I'm definitely very involved in recruiting. I think when you're so early in your career, how do you stand out is definitely hard. And I think that the extent to which it's sort of, none of this is not any, there's no pearl of wisdom, but like to the extent you really can lean into making connections with people as a way to get a foothold in the door, it is important. I agree that it sounds sleazy when you say networking, but think of it in the least sleazy way. You are trying to, you know, you are really just trying to understand, what certain realms look like, reaching out to people in those areas to hear about their experience, and then seeing if they, can help you in finding an area that might be a good fit. So I think using your network to get a foot in the door is really important because there's just so many.
Just to add to that, I've been talking a lot about networking to students because when I was a college student, I did not network. I had no idea how to network. Didn't even really have LinkedIn back then, so it wasn't as easy as it is now. LinkedIn is used by almost every professional out there, so it's a lot easier to network. But I decided there was a person who did IX like a couple of years ago who was an insane networker. She networked with like a couple hundred of different types of people, was having so many conversations. And I asked her to make a guide on how to network because, it was like she had a Notion file and templates and all these things. And I was like, this is incredible. So we packaged that into like a little video. And, if someone subscribed to this newsletter or podcast and they refer 5 other people to it, they actually get access to this really cool little networking module. So I just wanted to say that because hearing you talking about how important it is, we actually know that. And we're like offering this to people as a free little networking toolkit that I think would be really cool for you guys who are listening um, to 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 get. It can really help you because it's not actually as hard as it seems. You just need to do it and to have like, okay, I'm going to spend 5 hours a week networking, and like you say, that is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I love that, and I would have benefited tremendously because, to your point, it was networking is so nebulous to me, and again, it kind of has that sleazy connotation, but like it shouldn't. Um, and I'd say every day I probably get reached out to by at least one or two people on LinkedIn, and that contrast in good networking versus bad networking becomes very apparent when these messages to people are like to myself are juxtaposed against one another. As in,
Well, what makes it a message?
it's quite clear. I mean, some are really just like, hello, can you please refer me to this role? And others are more like, hey, notice this in your background, like really see parallels to this in my background. And, I'm kind of interested in exploring XYZ space. Would love to hop on a 10-minute call just to pick your brain and hear about your experience. of course, those people come across as like seasoned veterans of like, of just operating as a professional. And those are people that I often do hop on a 10-minute call with. 10 minutes is nothing for me, that's totally fine. That 10-minute call. And again, even within that, you notice the people that approach it differently. Some are like very loosey goosey and like don't really have an agenda for what they want to ask you. Other people come in and they're like, thank you so much for the time. Really just have a couple concrete things I want to ask you. Now, those are the people that immediately afterwards, I'm like, yes, tell me about what I like happy to answer all your questions. At the end of it, tell me about what you're interested in. Let me see where I can plug you in or get you connected or really refer you to a role internally. So I think there are definitely do's and don'ts of networking.
Sorry, I didn't actually want to break your train of thought because you were in such a role there. In terms of, we were talking about how to stand out and how to prepare for interviews. We got sucked into the networking topic, which is a great topic. But I really want to hear what else you have to say. I imagine that as a chief of staff, like you say, you definitely are obviously involved in a lot of recruiting. And I think, college students it's just not something you get taught. Really, you don't get taught like how to prepare for an interview or how to, what you should be putting on your resume. And it's quite competitive, so no one really wants to show you what they're doing, right? But I think it's great to hear from people who are hiring what they look for. And, you might have 15 interviews in a day and you're like, okay, that person stands out. And that's what I'm trying to understand what that is.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing that becomes really noticeable between candidates, and I'd say this at literally any level for which you're hiring, whether it's a new grad or whether it's like a seasoned product, leader. Uh, the thing that is always the most noticeable, and let's say just like beyond technical interviews that you might have, like if you're a software engineer, you're going to get a technical interview. So putting those aside for a moment, like interviews that are more case based, um, the things that you notice that really drives the distinction is how structured people are in the way that they answer questions. And this isn't even something I would say that I'm personally good at. It's something I've gotten better at and learned to be good at. But it's the kind of thing where when you're asked a question, if you need to take the time to jot down for like, 30 seconds how you're going to structure your answer, you should absolutely do that because it makes you come across as such a clear and cogent communicator when you do it that you immediately that you just immediately seem capable. So for example, if you are asked, walk me through how you would think about launching this shape of product in this market, right? It's like it's a little behavioral, a little case, but like not a heavy case type of question. It's just a hypothetical. Those are the types of questions where some people just start talking and it becomes apparent that they have very little structure. Other people go into that and they answer with, okay, so let me first just walk you through my assumptions of what we're talking about with this product and what we're talking about with this market that we're trying to get into. Like I have these three assumptions. So if we're aligned on those assumptions, then I think there's kind of like three phases to which we would want to approach this, and walking through each of those. And based off of that, there might be this set of risks that we see, and here's maybe two or three ways that we would think about addressing those risks. Some people really come in with that type of structure. It's the minority, the tremendous minority, but it is immediately noticeable.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense, because in the world of work, everything is challenging. You can't just suddenly have an answer for a very complicated question. Should we open our experience in Asia? Well, that requires you to ask a lot of questions about, economics and pricing and weather and, medical conditions and all kinds of things. So I think, yeah, those assumptions are critical. And I think, asking really good questions to set yourself up for a good answer is also a great way to come across as thoughtful and considered. Because, for me in the working world, most things are new and difficult. And so, approaching it with a mindset of like, we need to find out information. so that we can have a coherent, well-constructed thesis is kind of like what work is really about, and then doing that with other people so you can get, cohesion kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. The question piece is huge to kickstart any thoughtful response.
Okay, well, that's super interesting. That's a really nice takeaway for a student is learn to think like that. Learn to take a step back, learn to understand what your assumptions are, learn to validate those, understand the risks, clarify that you understand those are going to be part of your answer, and then be thoughtful. And you don't have to rush into it. So I think that's great. I guess we have about 10 minutes left. And, I really want to segue into a sort of a slightly different topic, which is more around mental health and well-being. I find that, I see a lot of people working many hours in a day. You go from college and then you suddenly start to work 12 hours a day and you're like, what is happening? I've seen people burn out. I've seen people, have panic attacks and that kind of thing in the working world, especially early on in your career and even in college. And so what I want to try and help the audience understand is that it's normal to be anxious. It's normal to go through ups and downs, but there are ways of managing and improving your life through different tools and tactics. And so I'd love to understand, how do you approach that in your life? Like, what is your approach to balance and well-being and keeping your energy levels high in what seems like a relatively high demand job?
Yes, this is near and dear to my heart, and I will be the first to raise my hand and say that I have struggled. I've definitely gone through my phases of struggling with like burnout and sort of the mental health that is associated with that. I think one of the biggest things that has gotten me to a better place is just really understanding the sources of my stress and my anxiety and, and then my burnout. Um, and I think what I realized is that a big portion of that could be labeled. And sometimes like we tend to let these like, these fears or these feelings percolate in this nameless state. And I think you cannot do that. You must try to name it and be very specific on what the thing is that's causing your stress. And in my case, what I ended up realizing is like, wow, why do I feel like so much anxiety with like these important meetings and like just having this like crazy packed schedule? And what I realized was that it came down to the fact that I actually had a fear of disappointing people. Like that was the crux of it. That is the label of the fear. And it is that fear that's producing this stress. The stress isn't just getting dropped onto me. The stress is self-created, and it is this fear of disappointment. And it was, partly that like I would secretly fear disappointing my boss on some deliverable. And so I would push myself to the brink of, productivity in order to hedge against that fear of disappointing them. And so in many ways, my my hyper productivity was a function of this sort of like insecurity. Uh, so I think the first thing one should do is just really try to label what specifically is causing your stress. And then once you do that, you can sort of back out actual strategies to unpack that what is probably irrational, stress trigger. And so in my case, it just came down to starting to be like, very explicit in communicating with my partners or my leaders proactively on certain things. Like if I didn't think that I could do something to the quality that I wanted to in a certain amount of time, I just tell them. I just say, hey, look, folks, like here's where it's at. Like, here's my proposal. Like, let's give me another 2 weeks of runway on this kind of thing. And just being very proactive in, whether you want to call it creating boundaries or whatever, being proactive and communicating liberates you to just feel better. Like if you're ever in doubt about whether you should communicate something, you should probably communicate it. So that became one of my big tactics to get past some of the, some of the urgency that was inducing my burnout and my mental, health challenges. So that's a big one.
Yeah, I haven't actually thought about that one. I always think about, you know, balancing my days with exercise, making sure I make times for social activities, getting out in nature, meditating, but really getting to the core of labeling what is causing this feeling and understanding it and working through it. Seems like a really, really good tip, you know. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with us.
And I think that like all the things you just listed, at least for me, sort of dovetailed out of some of those, steps taken within the job. As in, absolutely, many of those things you've listed, I have become tremendous advocates of and adopt in my life in terms of like working out regularly, like almost every day, taking time to block time on my calendar to literally go on a walk or to meditate. These were things that, again, in college, I would have been like, oh, like vomit, like how, like I will not become one of those, like yoga proponents. But now, of course, I'm like meditation all the way. You're gonna realize quickly that this is kind of where it's at. So I think blocking that in your calendar, you need to remind yourself that you are not doing right by the business, by whatever company you are working for, if you burn yourself out. Like that is actually not doing right by anybody. Because, they want you here for the long haul. You want to be you want to be in a happy and joyful place. And you actually just can't do that if you are not taking time
Yeah, I mean,
for things
it's
that
the
are
same.
important.
The same if you're in college. The person you're trying to win for is yourself, and what you need to do is actually put yourself first, and that means you know taking the time to have activities or do things that are going to benefit you and give you more energy. When I was in college, I did some ridiculous things, like I would stay up procrastinating till midnight, and then I would start my problem set, and then I would drink a coffee and do it until like 4:30 a.m. and then go to bed and then wake up at 9 a.m. to go to like a Spanish class. And I was like, why did I do that? That just makes, and then I would like not listen in the Spanish class because I was so tired. And then I'd have to come back and take a nap. And then I would do my Spanish homework and be like, I didn't actually listen in that class. And like, now I'm like on the treadmill. And that was just like how I went about my life in college, and I'm sure a lot of people do that. And it doesn't really benefit you because you need to be rested. You need to be uh, doing activities that actually keep your energy levels high. And that's like sort of quite a big theme in this podcast is like, you can do all the things, get a great resume, do an internship. But when it comes down to it, the people who are looking after themselves by eating healthy, by sleeping well, are going to have clarity of mind, and they're going to be able to make great decisions, and they're not going to be running around kind of like trying to do too much. And I really wish that was something I knew, or the tools I knew when I was in college. It would have just kept me a little bit more centered, and not as frantic. So yeah, I think simply even just trying to meditate, if you've never done before, it seems like you say, so kind of ridiculous. But from a science point of view, I have this thing called the Whoop, which I use. I don't know if you've heard of it. I'm sure you have. But they have a measurement called HRV. When you sleep at night, it gives you a score in the morning, heart rate variability. And that score kind of tells you how relaxed you are and what kind of relaxed state, or are you very stressed. And since I've started measuring this, I'm like, okay, my goal is to get my readiness score up. And I realized if I have a really stressful day, and I don't take the time to like unwind, my readiness score the next day just like completely drops. And just being aware that your body fluctuates, depending on what you eat and what you drink and, what things you do. Focusing on your mental well-being and your energy levels is going to help you be successful in the long run.
Yep. I think that's, becoming deeply self-aware, uh, not only mentally but also physically, is the name of the game. Like we are playing the long game here. And in college, I think it's easy to forget that or to just, you know, in some cases, I feel like if you're not a college athlete, you actually just aren't as often aware of this like mind body connection. Um, and starting to build those healthy practices uh, will serve you so tremendously if you get over that initial hump of skepticism, um, to actually try to get a pattern and routine in place. And I think again, like it took me 10 years to learn that, as in I'm like 30 now, and I think I think it took me all those 10 years, but I look back and I'm like, man, if I had just figured that out at 20, like that would have been great. I'm in a good spot now, but
That's the whole point of this podcast, right? It's like trying to transfer the knowledge that's taken you and I so long to learn and being like, okay, well, you're 18, 19, 20. We've done this, and this is the wisdom picked up along the way through trial and error. Try it, experiment a little bit, and see. Maybe it will take you on a different path. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for an hour, if you can believe it. It's been an incredibly interesting conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. And I actually feel like, maybe in like 3 or 6 months, we should do like a follow up episode, because there's just so much insight that you have, and so much that you've learned, and so much to share that it really is powerful for students. I think for me, the biggest takeaways are, really be curious and take that step when you feel fear. Recognize the fear, label it, and go there. Don't let it hold you back. And, when you're thinking about interviews, take the time to ask, and don't just ramble, and, test your assumptions. And then, when it comes to your health, like, and your well-being, like, it's important, and it's something in college that you need to start thinking about and building up small practices that will eventually serve, well, they will serve you in college, but they will definitely serve you as you enter into the stressful world of work.
yep, I think well summarized, and I think all of that comes down to this idea of just like be intentional. Listening to this podcast is a great way of being intentional about about trying to shape the life that you want, and you deserve that, but it does require some conviction. Um, and so I think all of those topics we hit on hopefully are encouraging folks in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I hope this episode really inspires people. It should. And, like we talked about networking, you should refer other people to listen to this, because I think they can benefit from it. And the more people that listen, I think, the bigger the impact will be, because this really is an impact-driven project. So I encourage you to do that, but also reach out to me if you have questions, or I don't know, Sabra, it does sound like your inbox is pretty full. I don't get that many messages. I used to a lot, but I'm sure if they want to come through to you, it'll make time. But I really do thank you for sharing a lot of your life with this audience, and I really enjoyed chatting to you. So I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Aaron.
And that's a wrap. What an amazing episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please don't forget to go onto the Spotify link, like and subscribe to the podcast, maybe leave a review. And if you want to see the video, you can go to the YouTube channel and watch it over there. But the best part of all is the newsletter. So every week we send out a newsletter, the Career Coach newsletter. This will give you access to additional information, show notes, tutorials, book reviews. So I highly recommend that you sign up and subscribe to the newsletter. And as always, feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, and see you soon on the next episode.